that we desperately need in these days. We had an interesting conversation. I was starting the kind of planning conversation with the rabbis at Kol Hamet and Eitz Chaim and the JCC around kind of our thoughts for Shavuot, because we do this big community Tikkun Leil Shavuot, a big night of study and community, and we're thinking about what a theme might be. But one of the things that we were talking about last night at services, I mentioned this, and yesterday I taught at Moldau and taught about this idea of Yossi Klein Halevi talks about, this was an article from 7 years ago, but he talks about this idea of Purim and Pesach Jews, right? Purim Jews are kind of always sort of, they're sort of for those who've ever done like the security training, the kind of meerkat approach, right? They're sort of always like perked up and looking around, kind of watching for a potential threat, are the Purim Jews, right? Kind of recognizing that as Jews throughout our history, we have faced many existential threats from without, and as opposed to the Passover Jews, which is really thinking about our stance in relationship to the world around us, right? How are we a source of empathy for addressing oppression or for lifting up those, whether Jewish or not, who are oppressed in the world, sort of inspired by our Jewish values, and their intention with each other. Similarly, that tension between being open and welcoming and warm, and also making sure that we're secure. So trying to do both at the same time. But we were talking about the possibility of what might it mean to be a Shavuot Jew, which may end up being the frame for Shavuot. We'll see. But it was an interesting conversation because I think on some level it really was about this notion of not looking externally and not being wary of what threat might be coming in, but sort of saying, like, who are we? What are we proud of? Where is our Jewish pride and where is our Jewish joy? And making sure that we lean into that, right? Torah and the moment of revelation is really a symbol of lifting up our Jewish pride and our Jewish joy. And so that is what we do when we come together every Saturday morning for Torah study. That's what we do when we gather in community, is we hopefully are leaning into that sense of filling our Jewish cup, right? That like as much trauma and stress and strife is out there in the world, like we're Jewish for a reason, not just because of birth and not just because perhaps we made a choice at some point in our adult lives to become Jewish, but like we're Jewish because it means something to each of us, and each of us in a different way. And coming and studying and debating and engaging hopefully just fills your cup to sort of I don't know, resist or feel fettered by I don't know if fettered is the right word. I just made that up. But to feel like you have what you need to hold your Jewish head up high. So that's what we're engaged in, and it seems fitting almost in this moment that our portion is Vayak'heil Pekudei. Vayak'heil, right, is really this idea of the community assembling. And why are they assembling? It's mainly to receive instruction from, and Rabbi Nambi talked about this last night. It's to receive instructions for how to construct the tabernacle, right, the Mishkan, the mobile sanctuary that they'd carry around with them, which at this point, as the readers, we're like, well, of course, we know all the details for what this thing looks like and how it's going to be built and what it's going to be made of, et cetera, et cetera. We've been hearing about it for weeks. But the Israelites haven't, right? All that we've been reading has been up here on Sinai between God and Moses. And so we know something they don't. And this is really the moment in which, and Aviva Zornberg points this out, right? This is the moment in which the instructions around the tabernacle and really on some of like the vision for this big building project go from being very private and sort of just in a small room over here at the top of Sinai to actually being shared with the entire community and kind of democratized out into the community, and in a way that right, it's the moment of this project going public. And also at the same time that the people find out about it, they're also tasked with actually building this thing, to the point that by the end of Pekudei, which is the last parsha in the book of Exodus, and the last chapter, chapter 40, begins with so Vayak'heil and Pekudei kind of really outline the instructions to the Israelites of how this thing will be constructed, the appointment of different artisans and different people. I loved that image that Rabbi Nambi shared last night of, there was a role for everybody in the community to participate in this project in some way. Perhaps a nice literal metaphor for where we are at in our community right now as we are about to embark on our own big building project of rejuvenating this campus. But there were different levels and different ways in which people could participate, whether it was giving gold and silver or dolphin skins for the people that I guess carried around dolphin skins. I don't leave home without it. Maybe you too. Or Bezalel and the artisans who are really tasked with visioning what this thing, how these instructions and blueprints got translated into practice. To all the different artisans and craftspeople and weavers, et cetera. Like there were so many different kinds of opportunities for the people to get involved in this project. And it goes from being idea to execution to really ending with completion. And so what I thought we'd look at, since Rabbi Nambi talked about that so beautifully last night, the kind of instructions and the project, I thought we'd actually look this morning at the kind of moments of completion. And I see Elaine has her hand up. So before we look at that, Elaine, go ahead.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. It just what you said, how you started out, just really made me think about how important it is for all of those people, the people who are concerned about the safety, the people who are studying, the people who, whatever their role is, because it was like this division of labor that has been with us, forever. Like there are the priests and there were the rabbi, the teachers, the like the people who are supposed to be the warriors. And if you didn't have that, then you wouldn't be able to study and learn that, okay, then we do need to watch out for everybody else, including ourselves. So I think instead of, necessarily looking at, well, they're the Purim Jews and the Passover Jews and the Shavuot Jews, I kind of think about the Sukkot, the Esrog and the Lulav, and they're really all needed because, I was just reading about the Detroit, the synagogue, what happened there. And if they didn't have the security people who were so well trained, the teachers who were so well trained, there wouldn't be any study and there wouldn't be any looking out for the rest of the community. So I would hope that instead of seeing that as a division of people looking in different directions, that they're all kind of looking toward the center and supporting each other and,
So a really
supporting the
excellent.
mission. Yeah.
Um, Elaine, thank you. Steve, can I ask you to just turn up the Zoom volume a little bit? Yeah, Larry. Pass.
Larry Shapiro, Shabbat Shalom. This is kind of a technical question. Why are there two parshots in this week? I mean, when you look at the whole section, it's really all about the same thing.
Mhm.
Why did they divide it up and then not divide it up? I mean, it seems very curious.
It's really a practical thing. The rabbis divide up the parshiot into 54. There are 54 distinct parshiot, and to your point, sometimes they're more connected than others, which is why sometimes when there are double portions, they're thematically connected, or kind of a continuation. That's kind of why that happens. Why those two portions are sometimes paired with each other. Another really classic example is Tazria Matzora, right, which talks at the beginning about childbirth and then goes on to talking about tzara'at, which is that sort of mysterious scaly skin disease, which we, I think, in here have decided is not leprosy, right, Jeff? Yeah, maybe psoriasis, which kind of sounds like tzara'at, maybe not. But that is mentioned in Tazria and then goes into even more depth in Metzora, which is connected to Tzara'at. So those two are often paired, but it's really based on so 54 portions. How many weeks in a year? Very good. 52 weeks in a year. So, but sometimes there are holidays that fall on Shabbat. Sometimes there's a leap year where there's an extra month placed. So there are a few portions that are paired with each other in years when we don't need extra readings, right? When the holidays maybe don't fall on Shabbat, that you're reading something else. And so those are paired together. But on years like in leap years, they're then split apart into two separate weeks. So it's really just kind of a practical, technical solution to a pretty mundane problem. Yeah, Jeff. Not about Sarah. Oh, here, Larry. Okay.
We're talking 52 weeks, but on the Hebrew calendar, it's totally different. So
right.
52 is an anomaly.
Yeah, 52, right. 52 is our number in the Gregorian calendar. Absolutely right, because it's really from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, or really Rosh Hashanah to Simchat Torah every year of the next year. Or sorry, Simchat Torah to Simchat Torah is kind of like the calendar. And you're right, sometimes there's an extra 4 weeks of readings when an extra month is added to the Hebrew calendar. That's why like everything is, might feel late or early in a given year is as the calendar corrects, because we're a solely lunar calendar that adjusts, right? As opposed to like the Muslim calendar that is purely lunar, which is why Ramadan might fall in December or July, depending on the year. The Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, readjusts to make sure that Passover is always in the spring, for example, right? That there are certain holidays that are connected to different harvests that happen at different times of the year. So always nice to have a little calendrical refresher. All right, let's dive in though. I'm starting. Nope, that's not the one. Sorry, those are my notes, not for you. That's what I want. There we go. I'm starting by looking just briefly at, we're not going to spend a lot of time on Bezalel, but what I think is really interesting from sort of a, we'll say Torah as literature or literary work perspective, though certainly there are implications beyond this, and I don't think it's accidental. And certainly the rabbis love this, myself included, is there are some pretty powerful connections linguistically between the way in which the completion of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, is described, and the way in which the completion of creation is described in particularly unique word and verb choices specifically. So we'll look at that in a minute, but kind of looking more broadly at this project as kind of not an act of creation, but a creative project. Fair? Great. And those connections really start actually with Bezalel, both in terms of the Torah and also those seeds of that connection between creation and the Mishkan are then sort of nurtured in the Midrash, beginning with Bezalel, and then it evolves later. So, you with me so far? Great. No? All right. Can somebody read for me this verse? Great, Jane. Thank you. Elaine, you'll get the next one.
And Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, Adonai has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, and the tribe of Judah. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship.
So I think I was looking through my notes. I think a couple years ago, for these parshiot, we spent some time looking at that notion specifically, right? What is it that constitutes Bezalel's kind of unique qualifications? First, he has a ruach Elohim, right? Literally like the spirit of God. Right, Ruach Elohim also is a nice reference to the creation story. That's one of the first things, right? That there's this Ruach Elohim, this kind of wind or spirit of God that sort of hovers or murmurs over the firmament. So it's an interesting hearkening back to the creation story in language. And what constitutes a Ruach Elohim? Right, Chochmah, Tvuna, and Dat. Or said, if you kind of distill those to their roots, Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. Chabad, anybody recognize those sounds? Chabad. And that's where Chabad gets its name. Because it's an acronym, for those that didn't know. Right, is this notion of Chochmah, Bina, and Dat, which are also, right, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And I think a couple of years ago, we looked at all the midrashim that kind of parse out what's the nature of each of these things. They kind of sound like synonyms, but there are no synonyms in rabbinic literature. Like, of course, they imply different qualities, different aspects of these kinds of knowledge and understanding and insight that Bezalel specifically had. And that triad is actually in the weekday Amidah. It's one of the first blessings that we say. So we have, on Shabbat and during the week, we have Avot ve'imahot, right? The blessing we come into prayer on the merit of our ancestors. We have Givorot, which is all about God's might. We have a sanctification either of the day or of God's name, right? So like on Shabbat, we talk about how great the seventh day is and this day of rest. And then the first blessing of those kind of short intermediary blessings that are requests talks about, you blessed humans with chokhmah, bina, and da'at. It's one of the first things that we kind of offer thanks to God for having, and also sort of asking God to help us maintain those qualities. So that's not inconsequential or disconnected from this idea of chokhmah, bina, and da'at. I saw a hand pop up, but maybe no. Okay. So just worth thinking about Bezalel's kind of creativity. Hal, you had a question?
Shabbat shalom. Thank you. I love the notion of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And then you didn't bold, and then all manner of workmanship.
Oh yes, and he's also pretty good at his job, right?
But to some extent, it strikes me that the first three are sort of intellectual, and the fourth one is being really good with your hands and being creative and things of that sort. And it's almost a different dimension.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and this next text actually, I think, picks up on exactly what you're saying. So thank you for that lovely transition. About, the skills that, because it's an interesting question, right? It's funny, my parents are redoing their bathroom. And it's almost, Hal, to your point, there are different levels, or like internally, we're kind of starting to contemplate like developing a more comprehensive communication strategy. And there's a distinction. I don't know if Tina's on this call or not, but I remember Tina Rosenblum, who works in communication, saying to me, there's a distinction between, the person that might come up with your strategy versus the person that might execute it, right? They don't necessarily need the same skills or training or qualifications, right? You need, similarly with renovating a bathroom or building a mishkan. That's a weird comparison, but anyway, any building project, right? You need somebody that's able to take, a bunch of ideas over here and say, okay, I'm going to craft that into a big plan, and then the people who execute on that plan are not necessarily the same people who might be able to draw the blueprints or create the beautiful artistic renderings. So it's interesting, this way, to Hal's point, in which Bezalel is kind of a good combination of both intellect and also, like, he can pick up the hammer and like put the thing together. Perhaps. Jane, go ahead.
Maybe Noah is an example of somebody who could build something but didn't necessarily have those other traits.
That's a really interesting, yeah. Perhaps Noah. That's an interesting point, right? We see Noah really executing on the building project, but he's not explained or described in these words. It's an interesting, we often compare like Noah and Abraham or Noah and Moses, but it would be an interesting kind of like text study to compare the difference between Noah and Bezalel as kind of two different kinds of building project.
Rabbi, aren't there some clues that Noah was not the sharpest saw in the shed?
Perhaps. Sandy.
Sandy Spector. When you were talking about the architect who can do the plans and the engineer or the builder who does it, the other piece is the person or the entity, in this case, who it's for.
Mm-hmm.
So, you thinking of bathrooms, of somebody's elderly.
Mm-hmm.
Here, this architect has this gorgeous thing, and then
Right, but it's not practical.
Yeah. But in this case, it definitely seems like it's for God, not for the people. So he's the designer, and it's, hey, this is what I want. And maybe Bezalel understands what I want and can convey that to the builders.
Yes and no. I mean, it's interesting because on some level, Bezalel kind of plays a similar role in a more, a similar role to the priests to a certain extent in this moment, right? If the priests because the priests are really meant to be the intermediary, right? They're the representatives of God to the people and the representatives of the people to God, right? So they're going, and on some level, that is part of what Bezalel is being tasked with, is you're creating this thing which is, I think it's both, though, Sandy. Like, I think it's both for God, representing God, but it's also for the people, right? Right? It's in one of the critiques of the Israelites in the moment of the golden calf is, well, like, they just received these instructions about not worshiping idols. But if you look textually, there's a little bit of a gray area about whether or not they actually heard that commandment about not worshiping idols. And then sometimes, so that's one. And then sometimes we judge them perhaps unfairly because they're resorting to something that they didn't know they weren't supposed to do yet. Perhaps. There's an argument also that they knew exactly what they were doing and didn't care. So there's that. Another response often that, like, I've given this sermon before, I'm guilty of this, is that in some ways the tabernacle is sort of the Mishkan is sort of a refocusing of that instinct to need a thing to focus on, that instinct to build a golden calf, which is a thing that you're worshiping the calf. Although when you read the text itself, it says that the Israelites were actually worshiping Adonai and dancing around the calf, but they weren't praying to the calf. They were praying to God. In some ways, the calf is sort of a representation more of Moses than of God, because they seem to still actually be praying to God, but they're just sort of falling on familiar Egyptian method. So that's a whole other discussion for another time. But that the tabernacle is sort of a refocusing of that energy, right? That we need, right? You can pray anywhere as a Jew, right? You can go out in the parking lot and say a prayer, and it is as effective and meaningful and efficacious uh, as if you were praying at the Vatican, which would be weird if you're a Jew. But or praying at the Western Wall, or praying, frankly, sitting in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, perhaps maybe more Jewishly appropriate than the Vatican. Right, that prayer is prayer, but that as humans we need direction of our intention, of our attention and intention, right? So when you come to synagogue, you know that you're in the mindset of I'm going to engage in prayer now, right? In a way that, right, you can pray. Some people often talk about having perhaps a more powerful prayer or spiritual experience while on a hike or watching a sunset or right out in nature, not in a building, because you're kind of encountering the majesty of creation in a way that, like, a synagogue is a human creation. Similarly, the Mishkan is a human creation, but the instructions come from God to sort of try to, I think, help us focus and evoke a deeper spiritual experience and be a focal point. With so many hands.
What? Okay.
Yeah, Sandy's got the mic, y'all.
Yeah. So, but you could say that's God's way or God's desire of how he wants to interact with the priest and the people versus they go, hey, we want to do this.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that just came up when you said about praying anywhere, and we maybe get more meaning coming to the synagogue. When wait a second, when I think of the Muslims, they kind of carry around their rug with them.
Mm-hmm.
Then, oh, here comes the little buzzer, and so they'll pull off the side of the road or, like do it anywhere,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Right. I remember walking. I had an internship where I had to walk when I was living in Jerusalem, where I had to walk across. I mean, I could have taken a bus, but I didn't. I walked across town, and there was a construction site with a bunch of Muslim construction workers, and often it was the afternoon, and I'd walk by as they were kind of rolling out their mats, and you face Mecca, and right. And so on some level, it's not where you're praying; it's the direction in which you're praying, which on some level is also very Jewish, although not every prayer, not every moment of prayer though necessarily has to be pointed at, like, when we typically gather as a community, we're facing Jerusalem, but to sort of like offer a prayer up to God, like sort of the like wow category, like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful sunset. Like, you can just sort of shout. That doesn't have to necessarily be directed to Jerusalem, though it could be. Okay, let's go Shelley, and then Joshua on Zoom, and then Steve. And then
Shelley Bear. So your juxtaposition of the golden calf with this just suddenly makes me think about the fact that with the golden calf, there was no Bezalel, as far as we know, right?
It was Aaron,
which
is also interesting.
Yeah. So it seems like God is looking at that situation and saying, like, okay, this is what people channeled their creativity, resources, jewels, whatever, into without any structure or direction.
Right. No divine input there.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we're going to the absolute opposite extreme of saying, okay, I'm going to give you every single detail about
down to the kind of material you're going to use for the nails, right? Like,
yeah. So we've gone from no Bezalel and no instructions other than, I guess, what Aaron provided at the time, to God saying, okay, if that's the way it is, there's going to be somebody in charge. And I'm going to give you the most excruciatingly detailed instructions of how to channel your resources, channel your creativity, channel your your impulse for aesthetics and place and worship?
It's also an interesting question. I think as you were talking, I was just thinking, we always see artistic depictions of the golden calf as this really beautiful, kind of perfectly crafted golden calf. But I almost wonder if perhaps it maybe looked more like something like a preschooler would make out of clay, right? Like it might not have been smooth and perfect. Like it might have been kind of a rough sketch or a rough sculpture of a golden calf, because Aaron is not an artisan, right? It's not necessarily crafted with the same intent. They kind of like slap this thing together. So it's an interesting question of like, what might it have actually looked like? It might not have been this kind of, anyway, that's too provocative. Don't respond to that. Joshua, go ahead.
Okay, hi everybody. Joshua Seeger, Shabbat Shalom. I can't help but focus on the extreme repetition in the Torah in general, but especially in these last two parashot. And others have observed this, which in my mind means this is poetry. This is meant to be recited over and over and over again. And in poetry, and in that context, there should be epic heroes. And of course, we have Moses and Aaron and everyone else. But Bezalel then is yet another epic hero in this saga of constructing this very intricately described Mishkan, tent of meeting, according to God's instructions. And so that's how I see who Bezalel really is.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. Okay, Steve, and then Larry, and then Ellen. And then we're going back to the text.
Okay, Steve Ruvalo, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So I liked the way Hal ended when he said, and he's good with his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the spiritual and intellectual, God does a call out to people who are good with their hands. And the fact that he expresses it in Torah, it means a lot. And when you walk around this town, you drive around this town, you see these houses being built. It's being built by immigrants, people undocumented, probably, and who are undergoing a terrible ordeal, doing God's work, I would say. And yet, look what's happening to them. So it just really touched me about the people who are doing God's work for us.
It's a really interesting. Yeah, I appreciate that, Larry.
So I wanted to compare the building of the golden calf and the building of the Mishkan. One of the obvious differences is that the golden calf is only made of gold.
Right.
And the Mishkan has got this long list of things. And in some ways, I mean, the Mishkan encompasses the whole world. It's a symbol of everything that is both man and God. And the golden calf is only one thing. And I don't picture the golden calf as being very large.
Right. It might have been little.
It might have been just tiny. I mean, because when they talk about in other instances, these idols, what's her name, carries it with her when they leave Laban.
Sarah? Sarai?
No, it's
Rebecca.
Rebecca. I mean, it's very obvious that these things are portable, and I just have this idea that it is very small thing, whereas the Mishkan is much more grand.
Right, or they might be about the same. I mean, because the Mishkan, keep in mind, the Mishkan there's the ark, and then there's the thing that houses the tent that houses the ark, and then there's the larger tent, right, which is then mirrored in the construction of the temple in Jerusalem in stone, and then it gets even more grand with Herod. But it starts off as kind of this series of tents that are more elaborate the closer you get to the holiest pieces. Ellen, and then we're moving on.
Ellen Taffine, in order to honor the covenant and in order to honor God, We have to follow his instructions and his blueprint for us. And that's the major blueprint is the Torah and all the instructions in the Torah on how we should live our lives with examples of pros and cons, what could be good and what could be bad.
Yeah. And this is literal blueprints, right? It's sort of like
absolutely
it's like practice almost, right?
It's teaching us discipline.
Yeah.
That's what it's teaching, is like you would teach a child discipline. You keep giving them instructions and making sure they follow it correctly.
Right. Or even, I think about when my kids were in kindergarten, they start learning numbers and counting in math with, little dots, or they're counting, the number of dolls on the table. But like that is the precursor to like trigonometry, right? Like but you can't get to trigonometry if you don't learn to count and you don't learn like sort of number sense and how to kind of manipulate different quantities of things and understand how things get added or taken away or multiplied or divided.
But it's a little different in this situation because what we're trying to do is learn how to honor the covenant.
Right. And this is sort of like, here, we're going to give you a very specific building project with very specific instructions that you follow in a very specific way. And it's like a training and it's also a blueprint for how you practice. Okay, we're going to dive back in because I want to look at this text from Talmud, a little bit about Betzalel, and then we're gonna so just hold on to this for a minute, and we're gonna move past it. So, Elaine, will you read for us?
Yeah. Barachot 55a, is that where we are?
Yeah.
12 to 13. Yeah. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, Betzalel was called because of his wisdom. In the moment that the Holy One, blessed be God, said to Moses, say to Betzalel, make for me a mishkan, an ark, and vessels. Moses went and switched the order, and he said to him, Betzalel, make an ark, vessels, and a mishkan. Betzalel said to him, our teacher, it is the custom of everyone that builds a house and afterwards places inside vessels. And you are saying, make for me an ark, vessels, and a mishkan. Where do I place the vessels that I am making? Perhaps the Holy One, blessed be God, said to you, make a mishkan, an ark, and vessels. Moses responded, perhaps you were in the shadow of God and you knew. Rav said, Betzalel knew how to combine the letters that were used to create the heavens and the earth. It was written here, Exodus 35:31, and he filled them with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and intellect. And it was written there, Proverbs 3:19, Adonai founded the land with wisdom and established the heavens with understanding. And it is written, Proverbs 3:20, with his intellect, the depths were broken.
So this is kind of the connection, again, sort of this last point in particular, right? So one is sort of Betzalel's ability to sort of, apply logic and sort of, look, I'm coming at this as a construction worker. Like you don't build your kitchen cabinets before you've got a house to put them in. It's an interesting argument. But the part that I think that I wanted to focus on was the second part, right? That he knew how to combine the letters that were used to create the heaven and the earth, right? These notions of wisdom, intellect, and understanding imply this kind of interesting, I don't know, connection to or attunement with sort of the building blocks of creation. And kind of going to Sandy's point, like this is not just a building project. I mean, it is, but it also like there's a holy element to this project, right? So it's as if they're saying Betzalel gets the holiness that underlies this whole project. So that's one piece. So now I want to kind of jump ahead to looking at the kind of completion of the tabernacle and the completion of creation. Because I think it's very interesting the way in which these two sort of line up side by side, if you will. So in our parsha this week, on the right, where it says building the tabernacle, right, we see Vayak'heil kol avodat mishkan ohel moed vayasu bnei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe ken asu. Right, thus was finished Techal, right, like Vayachulu hashamayim b'haaretz, which is on the left there, same root. Thus was finished all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so, ya'asu, just as God had commanded Moses, so they did. Right. So the asa verb, right, to do, is also in bold there. Just as we see, and look, and some of this is just, these are the verbs that you use when you're finishing something. But, the rabbis say, so on the left, right? Vayachulu hashamayim b'haaretz v'chol tzva'am vayachal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayeshbot b'yom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. The heaven and the earth were finished in all their array. You could also say, like, there's also like Siyam, though, or there's Gamar, right? There are other words for finished or completed other than like the Heichal verb here. On the seventh day, God finished the work that God had been doing, right? Asher asa, and God ceased on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. Again, Asher, Mikol Melachto Asher asa. So just an interesting connection there. Similarly, right, when the work is completed, we have kind of Moses looking over all the work that had been done at the end of chapter 39. Vayar Moshe et kol hamalacha v'hine asu otam ka'asher tziva Adonai ken asu vayavarach otam Moshe. And I actually realized as I was reading this this morning, that last piece, Vayavarach otam Moshe, and God and Moses blessed them. There are also moments of the creation story in which God blesses each of these moments, and in particular, God blesses the seventh day and names it holy in a way that God doesn't necessarily bless other aspects of creation. It's like the completion of creation that God blesses, and only the seventh day is called holy. Right, so when Moses saw, right, Vayar, right, just like Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa, and God saw all that God had made and found it very good. Moses saw that they had performed all the tasks as God had commanded, so they had done. Moses blessed them. So God saw all that God had made and found it very good, and there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. But again, God blesses the seventh day as well and makes it holy. So it's just an interesting comparison between these two moments. Now, they might have no, just conjuring my inner Harv here, they might have no connection to each other whatsoever. But I think the fact that that this is something that both the Mishkan and also the text of the Torah was something that was very carefully constructed and crafted by humans. It's an interesting literary callback at the very least. Even if the intention, if the connection wasn't, a deep connection was not intended, the way in which it calls back, these two massive holy construction projects. One is the holy construction project of creation, as we understand it as a people, and the other is the construction of this place in which we encounter God. Right? Because keep in mind, the last thing that happens, excuse me, once the tabernacle, once the Mishkan is completed, is that God's presence, right? The cloud of God's presence comes and fills the tent, right? God sort of dwells dwells there. So that's not nothing, I would say. Let's go. Rena, you had a question, and then Harv. And I'm just going to go grab a cup of water. Rena, go ahead.
So I was thinking about how you were comparing that how God created the world, and then they use a lot of the same language for creating the Mishkan. And in some ways, God, of course, did it very quickly, but it also is like an inspiration. God he built the earth and all that therein, and now they're building something. And so they're emulating God in his building something in the world. And the other part is that when a group works on a project together, it also builds community in a way. So I think you're emulating God, you're participating in creation in the world, having agency, and you're also building community through that whole time.
Yeah. And I would also just as a caveat say, perhaps it was a quick creation perhaps was a quick project, right? If we kind of read it as seven days, but also it's unclear exactly what the Torah means by day, right? Over 7 periods. So it could have actually been a very long building project, but that's another conversation again for another time. I'm also loving this as just kind of very relevant to where we're at as a community as we're taking on this other holy building project. Harv, go ahead.
There are several facets to this thing, and I haven't thought it out completely and worked it all out so that I can cover every facet. First, I'll start at the beginning.
I was going to say, we'll take what you've got so far.
The description in the beginning, if you want to interpret it that way, is the creation of the universe. On the other hand, it is a poetic description of rebuilding a community after it has been destroyed by some sort of enemy. The other facet is that the so-called golden calf and the Mishkan are really the same thing. Both are representatives of what they wanted to worship.
Right.
The golden calf has the temerity to be out in the open and therefore raise the ire of the so-called self-imposed holy people.
And I would say the other thing that the golden calf has against it is it looks like the idols from Egypt, right? In a way that the ark is something different.
Well,
but
whatever golden calf is,
right.
It might have been a lump of gold, for all I know. Right. But the Mishkan is a very complex structure. There are no really complete instructions on how to build it,
right.
Notwithstanding what everybody thinks. If you've ever been in a construction project, you know that there are all kinds of details that are not considered, and somebody with some skill and knowledge has to be doing it, otherwise it'll turn into a wreck.
Right. And that on some level is the role that Bezalel is playing, right?
Yeah.
Is he's able to take these kind of incomplete instructions and make it a thing.
Yeah. And where is it? As I said before, the so-called golden calf was out in the open where everybody can look at it and worship however they worshipped. On the other hand, the Mishkan hides the focus of the worship. So-called Holy of Holies by edict cannot be approached by anybody but the high priest.
On Yom Kippur, right? Like it's only,
whatever.
Closed off.
But he can only be approached by the high priest.
It underlines what you're saying, yeah.
The which makes it something in the order of a theocracy more definitely than a democracy where everybody can see the so-called holy and holies and do whatever they want in terms of prayer.
Yeah.
So in summary, I think the entire attitude and interpretations that have been given to these things over the years are really nonsense.
Well, but fair.
Sorry to be
Those
so
are
blunt.
good. Naomi, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, can you hear me double?
You're okay.
No, I just wanted to say something about the three verbs that you are talking about wisdom, understanding, and the knowledge.
Oh yeah, Chokhmah, Bina, and Dad. Yeah.
I like the idea that we are talking about it more like intellectually, but it's actually, if you read a little bit more, it says, give them the knowledge and the understanding so they will know how to do the craftsmanship. So it's very directed to a craftsman work and not necessarily the intellectual knowledge.
Interesting.
It doesn't mean that people that are creating craftsmanship are not intellectual, but we do have this idea that we look at people who are doing craftsmanship less intellectual than other people.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
in
mean,
this sense, yeah.
No, I mean, I think to your point, that kind of follows to a certain extent what Steve Ruvalo was saying earlier, right? That the people that are hammering the nails into the beams are an important element, and to a certain extent, like it requires a certain amount of skill to be able to take something on a piece of paper, right? Whether it's a Lego set or IKEA furniture or blueprints, and know exactly like, where and how to place this beam and where to put whether you're using nails versus screws or, which materials these different piece elements need to be built out of. That even the person that is hammering those nails into the beam, like needs a certain amount of, and there are different kinds of, there are different levels even within that of people that can kind of think about like people who make cabinetry or furniture, right? That are both like have incredible artistic ability and ability to actually like build with and create with their hands to kind of like take the idea in their head and put it into something. I want to hear from
That's
Arnie.
what my point. That was my point, is that the whole thing is directed to smart people that know how to do things, and it's
Yeah.
not about we are all knowledgeable, capable or understandable and all that. It's a
Right.
completely different idea. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. Arnie, go for it.
So the part that's missing for me, and maybe you can help me because I just tend to go here while with all this other talk. In any project, you have different aspects. You, of course, have the designer, you have the architect, you have the builder or the builders with all their varying, degrees of capacity. The part that is missing for me, and maybe you can help me with this, is where does all this stuff come from? Where do all the components come? We're talking about a project of a magnitude that is just prone for disaster. One part, one nail or whatever missing, and the whole thing falls apart.
Right. It's like
help me with this.
Right. It's the puzzle that you like, spend weeks and weeks on, and then you're like, crap, where's the last piece? Like it's not going to be done because I lost, it got like vacuumed up off the floor or whatever, or the Lego piece, right? And yeah, you just order from Amazon. No, somebody asked me that last night too, and it was funny because I said, well, like the Israelites brought whatever they had with them, And B, I think in the Torah, but definitely in the Midrash, there are these accounts of the Egyptians on some level being so glad that these Israelites are finally getting out of their hair and taking their stupid plagues with them, that they give them all of this gold and finery, and so they've been carrying this with them. And the person I was talking to last night said, really, they can take all this stuff with them and they end up with matzah, which is a fair and interesting point. I know there are lots of hands, but given that it's 10 o'clock, I want to finish with this text. This is from the Likutei Moharan, which is a work by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov from the 19th century, a great Hasidic master. He says, which kind of, I think, pulls some of these different disparate pieces together. He says, know this, the disagreement, machlochet, is analogous to the creation of the world, which consisted of creating an empty space, as we have shown. For were it not so, everything would be infinitely divine, right? Ein Sof, without end, and there would be no space left for the world. Therefore, God contracted the light to the sides, and an empty space was left in which the world could be created, with all its time and spatial dimensions, all done by the act of speech. As it is written by the word of God, were the heavens made, so in Psalms. So too is the case with disagreement, for if all the scholars were united, there would be no creation of the world. It is only when there is disagreement between them, and they divide and each draws to one side, a space is created between them, which is analogous to the empty space and the contraction of the lights, by which the world itself was created by the act of speech, as we have shown. And all the arguments they each use are only in order to allow the world to be created by them. Just as God created the heaven and the earth with words, so too can scholars. So interesting about, kind of all these different kinds of creative and construction-y projects, or construction adjacent projects, require also a clearing of space and an opening to have space for those things to happen. So hopefully you're able to find a little space for your own creative projects this Shabbat or this week. Let's rise for Kaddish de Rabbanan. I will stop sharing.
It's a word project.
Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world whose creation God willed. May God's sovereignty soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say Amen. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored. Though God is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations that we can utter. And let us say Amen. God of heaven and earth, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah here and everywhere. Let there be for them and for us all grace, love, and compassion, a joyful life, sustenance, and the hope of your sovereignty. And let us say Amen. For us, for all Israel, and for all humanity, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say Amen. May the one who makes peace in the high heavens, the peace descend on us, on all Israel and all the world. And let us say, Amen. Amen, amen. Shabbat shalom.